The Saffron Robe, A Life of Sadhu Sundar Singh, by Janet Lynch Watson. Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Christina Georgina Rossetti. Chapter 1. Mystic lost in Tibet. Christian preacher who visited London. Feared vengeance by lamas? From our own correspondent, Calcutta. Misgivings are felt among his followers in India regarding the safety of Sadhu Sundar Singh, the Christian mystic and preacher. Not a word has been heard of him since he entered Tibet in April on one of his preaching tours. Morning Post, 18th of November, 1929. Newspapers all over the world, from Australia to Sweden, from Japan to America, reported the news that Sadhu Sundar Singh was missing. He had failed to return from his last perilous visit to Tibet. People searched, prayed, and hoped, but he was never seen again. Mystery and uncertainty surrounded the circumstances of his disappearance. One thing that is certain is the profound influence this remarkable Indian had on people of many races across the world. His story begins on the 3rd of September, 1889. He was born the youngest son of a rich Sikh landowner and farmer called Sardar Sher Singh. The family lived at Rampur in the state of Patiala, a village set in the dusty Punjab plain in the north of India. Sundar's father, being an elder brother, was the head of the whole family. He was a man of authority and greatly esteemed in Rampur as a local leader. Sundar, with his brothers, sisters, and cousins, would have lacked nothing in the material sense. It was a secure home for a child to grow up in. The days followed a steady, ordered pattern, broken only by regular visits to the Himalayas each summer. They often stayed at Simla, where the cool mountain climate was a welcome relief after the heat of the plains. Their family life was strong. Rooted in a dignified Sikh heritage, they traced their faith back to the 16th century, when the founder, Guru Nanak, sought to blend the best of Hinduism and Mohammedanism. Their creed can be summed up simply as a belief in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Thus, Sundar's Sikh faith, with its emphasis on a personal God and its rejection of the Hindu caste system, prepared the ground for his later Christian conviction. Christianity was not a rejection of his ancestral beliefs, but a fulfillment of them. For Sundar, in his childhood years, the dominant feature of his life was the love between him and his mother, who was no less esteemed than her husband. Women are given a place of honor in Sikh families, and she was especially revered for her deep religious belief. So far, she had failed to kindle this same spark of devotion in her elder sons, but with Sundar, her youngest boy, she had a particular, tender affinity. From an early age, he accompanied her to Hindu temples. He walked proudly beside her when she went to consult the Sikh sadhu, or holy man. His mother was remarkably liberal in her religious attitudes. She did not despise the beliefs of others, for she felt truth was clothed in many forms. Through her, Sundar received a grounding, not only in the religious writings of the Sikhs, but also introduced to the holy books of the Hindus and Muslims. Sundar's mother used to say to him, "You must not be careless and worldly like your brothers. You must seek peace of soul and love religion, and someday you must become a holy sadhu." You must seek peace of soul. Thus she started her son on his quest for peace, a search that was to dominate his childhood and adolescence and drive him to the depths of suicidal despair before he found what he was seeking. In Sundar's own writings we see glimpses of his early years. A small boy, 5 years old, wakes one morning and calls to his mother, "I'm hungry. Can I get my milk?" "No, Sundar," his mother chides. "Your prayers first, food later." This was a scene that was often repeated. No doubt, Sundar rebelled, and sometimes he was punished, but in later years he was to remember his mother with gratitude for this early discipline. "Although at that time," he wrote in one of his books, "I was too young to appreciate the value of these things. Yet later on, I realized their value, and now, whenever I think of it, I thank God for that training. And I can never be sufficiently thankful to God for giving me such a mother who in my earliest years instilled in me the love and fear of God." It was during these early morning devotions that he would have learned by heart the Bhagavad Gita, part of the Hindu scriptures in Sanskrit. It was a considerable undertaking for a 7-year-old. At the time of his 7th birthday, Sundar and his mother set out from Rampur across the plain to the jungle country. It was hot, it was dusty, but Sundar did not notice. Today he was to recite part of the Bhagavad Gita to the holy man in the jungle. It was not the first time he had made the journey. Often he trotted along with his mother on her regular visits. The shade of the trees was welcoming after the burning sun. Soon, Sundar and his mother were standing before the sadhu. Sundar, his brown eyes bright, could hardly wait to begin his resuscitation. The Sadhu was pleased with him, and Sundar listened with pride as the old man and his mother discussed how he might grow up to be a holy man, devoting his life to God. His father was less pleased. Much as he respected his wife, he felt that such behavior in a boy so young was unnatural. Night after night he found his son reading the Holy Scriptures. "It is bad for your health to read so late," he said. "Listen, Sundar, boys of your age think of nothing but games and play. But why has this mania possessed you at so early an age?" Sundar may have been tempted as the years passed to take his father's advice. Despite his reading, despite his prayers, despite the teaching and meditation and yoga that he received from holy men, Sundar had not found the peace he was seeking. However, encouraged by his mother, he did not give up. On one occasion, his father sent him off with pocket money to spend at the bazaar. While thinking what he would buy, Sundar met an old woman, cold and hungry. He was so moved at her plight that he handed her the money and ran quickly back to his father. "There is an old woman, father, whom I found near the bazaar, very cold and without food. We must help her. Can I give her a blanket?" To his horror, his father refused. "I have already helped her many times. Let someone else take their turn." Sundar was amazed and angry. How could his father be so callous? In a moment of rebellion, he took 5 rupees out of his father's pocket, intending to buy a blanket the next day. "Sundar, I have lost some money. Do you know where it is?" his father asked him that evening. "No, father," came the reply. That night, Sundar could not sleep. He was a thief and a liar. By the time morning came, he knew he would have to tell his father what he had done. As he summoned up his courage, he wondered how he would be punished. But his father did not punish him. He put his arm around his young son. "I have always trusted you, Sundar, and now I have good proof that I was not wrong. Buy the blanket, and buy yourself some sweets with this," and he gave Sundar another rupee. Sundar went to the American Presbyterian Mission School in Rampur. The government school, which he could have attended, was 3 miles away, so it seemed sensible to spare him the journey and let him receive his education locally. Here, for the first time, Sundar encountered the Bible, which he was taught every day. He was furious to think that he, a Sikh, should be forced to read and study the book of the despised Christians. He remembered the proud history of the Sikh religion. His was a faith that men had fought and died for. It was not for nothing that he bore the name of Singh, a title meaning lion, and used by the Sikhs since the early 18th century. Sundar openly defied his Christian teachers and led other boys to do the same. He was a precocious child and used his knowledge of Hindu scripture and of the Granth, which is the Sikh holy book, to counter the arguments of the missionaries. With the help of his mother's influence, Sundar might have overgrown his rebelliousness and come to regard the Christian school with a greater sense of perspective, for his mother had been friendly with some of the women of the Christian mission and would surely have helped him to a more moderate attitude. But Sundar's mother died. He was 14 at the time. Suddenly his world disintegrated. His love for his mother and their deep understanding of each other had been the cornerstone of his life. Only she had understood his search for spiritual peace. Without her, his chances of finding it seemed ever less likely. His mother's death left him with a sense of desolation and anger, and his elder brother's death, shortly afterwards, confirmed his mood. He directed the bitterness of his heart towards the Christians and the mission school. "Please, let me leave the Christian school," he pleaded with his father. Sardar Singh, downcast by his wife's death, was in no mood to argue. Sundar changed schools. For 3 months, Sundar made the hot and dusty journey across the plain to the government school. Persecuting and annoying the local Christian community was now confirmed to out-of-school hours, but Sundar and his friends took every opportunity. People who had known the gentle child who went with his mother to the temple were amazed and saddened at the change. As the summer progressed, Sundar found the daily trek to school more and more wearisome, until at last it was obvious his health was not going to survive the strain of walking 6 miles a day in the Indian sun. Hesitantly, his father approached the mission school again, and they agreed to take his son back, although they must have felt some reluctance. A tight-lipped, sullen boy returned to the Christians. They longed to help him, for his unhappiness was plain to see, yet he resolutely refused their friendship, with the comfort of their faith. His manner, although less aggressive, was still resentful. Occasionally he did look at a copy of the New Testament which they had given him, but what his own religious books had failed to provide he did not expect to find in the Christian's book. Yet one phrase leapt out of the page to him: "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Could that be the answer? He thought not, and he continued to show his contempt of Christianity. This contempt was such that one day, when the shadow of a missionary passed across him, Sundar set about washing himself to obliterate the stain, making a great display of his action. His father observed his behavior sadly, unable to understand his confused and unhappy son. One day in December 1904, Sher Singh, hearing shouting and laughter coming from the courtyard of his house in Rampur, went out to investigate. There was his son. Surrounded by a cheering group of young friends, tearing up a copy of the New Testament and throwing the pages onto a bonfire, he walked across to Sundar and remonstrated with him. "Don't be a fool, Sundar. That is a Christian's book, and a good book. What has got into you, that you do such evil things?" Sundar did not know what had got into him. Indeed, he almost envied his brothers and friends who appeared satisfied with life as it was. Such satisfaction eluded him. There remained this emptiness, this nagging thirst for God. To whomsoever he turned, the advice was the same. "Wait until you're older, Sundar, and you will come to understand these things." Sundar grew weary of waiting. Why should I have to wait? Sundar asked himself with all the impatience of a young man. What could he do to bring the matter to a head? How could he force the issue? 3 days after the incident of the burned New Testament, Sundar decided what to do. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he rose from his bed. It was dark and very quiet. Occasionally the call of a wild animal broke the stillness of the Indian jungle. Sundar doused himself with cold water to shake off the effects of sleep. Then he began a vigil of prayer. He prayed that if there was a God, he should reveal himself. Sundar made up his mind that if he did not find the peace he was seeking, he would commit suicide. At 5 o'clock that morning, the Ludhiana express train was due to pass close by their house. Sundar determined that if his prayers remained unanswered, he would lie down on the track in the path of the train. As the minutes passed, Sundar knelt and prayed fervently. When only half an hour remained, he was disturbed by the orange glow of a light shining in his room. Thinking perhaps it came from another part of the house, he cautiously opened the door, but all was dark and silent. He turned back into his room, half expecting the light to have vanished, but still it remained, growing steadily brighter, moment by moment. Describing this awesome experience in later years, Sundar wrote, "The light increased in intensity and took the form of a globe of light above the ground. In this light there appeared not the form I expected, but the living Christ, whom I had counted dead. Had the revelation been of Krishna or even Buddha, Sundar might not have been so overwhelmed, but there before him was the form of Jesus of Nazareth, whom he had despised and rejected. Jesus spoke to him in Hindustani. Tu mujhe kyun satata hai? Dek main ne tere liye apui jan salib padi. Why do you persecute me? Remember I gave my life for you upon the cross." Then Sundar recognized the scars of the crucified Jesus, and it was at this sight that brought him to his knees in adoration. At this moment there was one dominant thought in his mind. This Jesus is alive, not dead and buried as I had supposed. Moreover, there was love for him in those eyes, and the promise of forgiveness even for one who had burned the Bible. Sundar said afterwards, "My heart was filled with inexpressible joy and peace, and my whole life was entirely changed." The peace that indwelt him at that moment was like a steady flame, never to be extinguished. Like St. Paul, he had been confronted with the risen Christ even while persecuting his followers. Throughout his life, Sundar was to experience times of ecstasy and elation while in communion with God in prayer. In such states, he had visions of heaven and met people he knew to be dead. Yet he was convinced that this first vision of Christ, when he was 15 years old, was distinct and different in kind from any that were to follow. He always insisted that it was an objective occurrence quite external to himself and totally unexpected, since he believed Jesus Christ to be dead. He said once, "I have had visions, and I know how to distinguish them, but Jesus I have only seen once." He preferred to describe the events of this night as an appearance of Jesus, rather than as a vision of Jesus. The events of the night of the 17th of December, 1904, defy analysis. Controversial arguments concerning the authenticity of the appearance have been proposed and countered. Similarities to Saul's encounter on the Damascus Road are obvious, and Sundar would have heard the story in the Acts of the Apostles read at school. It has been argued that with Paul's experience in the back of his mind, Sundar's strained nervous state and colorful imagination took care of the rest. Other commentators have been discomfited by an alleged element of spiritual blackmail. After all, Sundar did appear to dictate terms and, so to speak, put God under duress. In considering all this, we must keep it within the Indian context and perspective. For Indians of Sundar's generation, the reality of the spiritual world impinged upon them daily. To our materialistic Western understanding half a century later, all this is unfamiliar ground. We can so easily forget that Sundar's experience would not have been deemed unusual by his contemporaries. What remains after the dust of the arguments is settled is the incontrovertible evidence of a changed life. You will recognize them by the fruits they bear. Can grapes be picked from briars or figs from thistles? In the same way, a good tree always yields good fruit, and a poor tree, bad fruit. St. Matthew 7:16-17, New English Bible. Surely the acid test of the genuineness of mystical experience is the effect it has on the subject's subsequent life. In Sundar's case, we note that the ensuing sense of inward peace transformed the quality of his whole personality, and was never to leave him. From henceforth his life had one overriding purpose: to follow in the steps of the risen Lord, who had been so wondrously revealed to him. As day dawned, on the 18th of December, 1904, Sundar's search ended. As he knelt on the bedroom floor of his home in Rampur, the glorious light faded. But God was found.